So that November evening in 1922, when Howard Carter chipped that small hole in the sealed door of the tomb of Tutankhamun, he was a bit ahead of schedule. You see, they weren't supposed to open the tomb until the next day, but he just couldn't wait. So he and three other companions went down the stone staircase that led to the tomb's door, and he took out a chisel that his mother had bought him years ago for Christmas, and he chipped a small hole in the door, just big enough to put a candle through to see what was inside. When he was looking, a companion asked him, "What can you see?" And he said very famously, "Wonderful things." And he wasn't wrong. That discovery represents one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in the history of mankind. Nothing before or since has ever compared to the tomb of Tutankhamun. So, after that quick glimpse, Carter hastily resealed the hole up and hid it as best he could, climbed back up the staircase, and waited till the next day to open the tomb. Now, among the artifacts that he discovered in the tomb were 4 Senet boards. Now, we knew about Senet before this through both hieroglyphic drawings as well as a couple of rudimentary game boards that were found in earlier burials, but nothing compared to the examples that he found inside of that tomb. Unlike most archaeologists of that era, Carter was obsessed with making sure that every artifact was carefully photographed, documented, cataloged exactly as it sat in the tomb before it was removed outside for cleaning and conservation. Now, the discovery of not one, but 4 Senet boards was a bit of a shock. It was a popular game in the Old Kingdom, but seeing 4 in a tomb for one person is the equivalent of burying somebody today with 4 PlayStations. It wasn't expected, but it made it very clear that it was the favorite game of the boy king. So let's talk about Senet and how you play it, or how we think you played it. See, the rules to Senet have been lost to time, and so far we've not been lucky enough to find any hieroglyphic writings or otherwise that would give us any kind of idea of how you actually played this game. But in the 1930s, a rule set was created for this game. Now, it wasn't just off the top of their heads. It was based on what we do know about the pieces and how they're laid out on the board, as well as the symbols and what they could have possibly meant to the game. Through the years, the rules have become more defined and more focused on strategy and making for far more interesting gameplay. So let's take a look at the board and show you how to play it. As you can see, the board is 30 spaces and has symbols carved in 5 of those. Now we'll go over what the symbols mean later on in the gameplay. But for now, let's focus on how you roll to move your pawn. Now, the Egyptian didn't really use dice. They had 2 versions that were most popular of how to roll for a game. They were casting sticks, just like these, or knuckle bones off of goats or other ungulates. I don't have any knuckle bones, so we're going to go with casting sticks. Now, casting sticks, as you can see, are painted either light color on one side or dark on the other. Now, when you throw these down, they will land one way or the other, and the combination of the colors tells you exactly what you're going to roll. For instance, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If a player casts a 1, a 4, or a 5, they could move one pawn accordingly, those many spaces, and then cast again. And that continues until they either roll a 2 or a 3, at which point they can move one pawn that many spaces, and then the next player casts the sticks. So now that we've covered the sticks, let's cover how you move your pawns. So you obviously have 2 different kinds of pawns here, 5 per player. And they start the game in this staggered formation. So for argument's sake, let's say I'm going to use the tall pawns and I rolled a 3. So I can move any one of these 3 spaces this way. How you move on the board is down this route, up the center, and back down the other side and off the board. The entire goal of the game is to move all 5 of your pawns off the board into the afterlife. And once you've done that, you've won the game. Okay, so let's assume I rolled a 3, and I'm going to move this pawn 3 spaces. 1, 2, 3. Now that I've landed on his pawn goes back to where I was, and I take his place. This is one of the chief moves of this game that allows you to throw your opponents back on the board while your position moves forward. It's important to note here that you can't take one of your pawns and land on a pawn of your own, nor can two pawns occupy the same space. Another important move to learn is guarding. If you have two pawns that are side by side on spaces, only lengthwise, not width, an opponent's pawn cannot replace either one of these. They are protected. The pawn can pass them, but it cannot replace one of them. If you get three pawns in a row, it effectively blocks your opponent from moving forward at all, no matter what they roll. But your pieces can, in fact, move forward on the board. Your opponent remains blocked until one of these pieces moves out of the way. A lot of new players try this blocking advantage early in the game, but they find that once you do that, you still end up fighting the entire length of the board. I find that the blocking is far more effective near the end of the game. So now that we've covered how to move your pawns around the board, let's talk about these markings on the board and what they mean. There are 5 markings in total, 4 of which are known as sanctuaries. This one is known as the House of Water, and it's a hazard. And we'll get to that after we cover what the sanctuaries are. The sanctuaries are nice because if one of your pawns is on any one of these sanctuaries, then it cannot be moved from that position by an opponent's landing on it. This first one is called the House of Rebirth. Now, if you land on this sanctuary, it allows you to move this pawn to any other sanctuary that is unoccupied. If there is an opponent's pawn in any of the sanctuaries, you do not switch places with them. You can only move to it if it is unoccupied. So the next sanctuary is this one, the House of Happiness. Now, this acts more of a stop sign for the game more than anything else, meaning that every single pawn in the game, both yours and your opponent's, is required to stop on this space at the end of a roll. Once you've stopped on this spot, you can move that pawn again at the next roll, but no pawn can pass this spot without stopping on it. So, the next sanctuary is this one, represented by 3 birds. It's known as the House of Three Truths. Now, if you land on that square, you're required to roll a 3 in order to get off of the board. You cannot move the pawn until you've rolled a 3. Now, this last sanctuary, represented by 2 kneeling people, is known as the House of Re-Atum. Now, this one is much like this one, in which if you land on it, it requires a roll of 2 in order to get off the board and into the afterlife. So the last square we're going to talk about on the board is this one, the House of Water, and it's anything but a sanctuary. Now, the point of this square is that if you land on it, you are required to take this pawn and move it to the beginning of the game and start entirely over. So here's an important addendum to the water hazard rule. If you land on the water hazard and you have to move your pawn to the first position in the game, and that position is taken by an opponent's pawn, you cannot switch places with them. If you do, it'll become an infinity loop that you will basically be living for the rest of your life. If a player is occupying that square, the very first square on the game board, then you move as close as you can to the beginning of the board. Now, I know it seems like you could just avoid the water hazard in the game entirely, but here's the pinch. In this game, you have to move a pawn when you throw the sticks, no matter what. If you have no legal move at all other than to move onto that water, you have to move on to the water. There is no passing on turns. So there you have it, the basic rules of Senet and how to play it. It may seem simple, but there's a fair amount of strategy, especially if you start thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead, and how to block your opponents and send their pawns further back on the board at the right time in the game. The games I used for this demonstration are ones that I produce in my shop, Hammer Nail Woodworks. I offer a wide range of Senet boards in my shop, both fancy heirloom editions such as this, to medium range ones, to even travel games. So make sure and check them out. I put a link for both of my shops in the description below. The large and medium-sized Senet boards that I offer in my shop also have an integrated drawer, not unlike the boards that were found in the tomb, that allows you to store both your pawns and the casting sticks when you're not playing. Another unique feature of some of the larger Senet games that I offer is that the game will remove from the carriage, and on the carriage face are engraved the rules of play. This makes sure that the game rules are always with the game. I think the origin of this idea on my games was from my childhood, where the rules of gameplay were usually printed on the inside lid of a game box. Not something you could probably do today, judging by the rules of some of the games behind me, but it was a neat feature back then anyway. Well, I hope you enjoyed this quick video about Senet, a little bit about its history, how to play it, and most importantly, where to buy it. Check out my sites and make sure and like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be doing more videos like this with other games that I offer on my page. I offer a wide variety of games, all based on ancient games throughout the world. Everything from ancient Rome, Sumeria, Japan, the UK. Please check it out. The next game I'm likely to do a video on is the game of Mihen, which is an ancient Egyptian game, contemporary with Senet, but not nearly as popular. But we do know much more about the rule set, and I'll explain that in the video. Thanks for watching, and keep an eye on this channel for more.